Live.
Are you there?
Yes, we are live. I'm just going to set this up. Um, I got to share this to a couple pages, and then we can get started.
Sounds
So,
good.
give me 2 seconds. Two shakes of a lamb's tail. Okay. Um, okay. Cool. We get started now. Sorry, apologize for that. Just trying to share this to get as many people as I can watching this. My name is Gits Crazy Boy, and I'm coming out of you out of Mohkinsists, which is Treaty 7 territory, and what we call so-called Canada, or Calgary. And I'm joined today by Desiree Kane. So, Desiree, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about who you are and what work you've done.
All right. Well, Mijuxis everyone. Thanks, Gits, for having me. My name is Desiree Kane. I'm a Miwok Two-Spirit living in occupied Arapaho territory, known as Colorado. Also, someone who organizes with the Missing Indigenous Women, or Missing Sisters Schools Initiative, which is, shortly called MISTY. And basically, we work on providing tools for families who are searching for their missing relatives by providing things like workbooks and resources. And
I'm sorry, 1 second. You're cutting, your audio's cutting out. Do you have a pair of headphones with the mic on it? Like cell phone headphones?
I could probably go find some.
Yeah, a little bit better.
Okay. Give me a second.
And I'll just elaborate while you're looking on what MISTY is.
Okay.
MISTY is one sec. MISTY is the Missing Indigenous Sisters Tools Initiative. The reason why I'm asking, and Desiree lives in south of the Medicine Line in the States, and the reason why I was asking for some coverage or some basic knowledge on the MMIW in the States is that a lot of our people live on either side of the Medicine Line. So if you're Sixakatsatepi, you're Blackfoot, we have Akena, we have Pikani, we have Siksika, but we also have Amskapi Pikani, which is down in Browning, Montana. If you're Mohawk, you know that you have relatives on both sides of the border. You're Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Nehio. Uh, if you're one of the amazing nations that are located out in the East Coast or the West Coast, you know that you have relatives that go up and down, and that the imaginary line that makes up Canada to the United States didn't apply to our people. So I organized this particular interview because Desiree has done a lot of work down there, and we can see how some of the problems have translated over into the states. So the audio sounds a
Okay.
little better.
I hope so.
Oh
Let's
yeah,
try it.
way clearer. Okay, so again, tell us
Great.
a bit of who you are and what work you've done or what work you do.
Okay. So the thing that we're working on with Misty right now is, and I can put it in the comment section on your video, but we have produced, it's myself and just a bunch of Native moms, a workbook for families who are searching for their lost relatives. A lot of times there's a one size fits all kind of approach to missing people. And one of the ways that families get traumatized is through asking over and over and over by authorities for information about their relative. So basically, it's a 40 something page workbook that helps families have data sovereignty and empowers their search. A lot of times, police apathy is part of the problem. So this just helps families keep on top of things.
What do you
So I'm
mean?
going to put it
Oh, yeah. Okay. Um, while you're putting it up there, can you elaborate on what you mean by police apathy?
police apathy. Uh, Sometimes they just don't pay attention. They just don't like they'll say that they're going to get back to a family and then don't do anything. Like in the case of Olivia Lodebear out of the Bakken, the police, they're supposed to take like 48 hours to get somebody into the National Missing Persons database. It took 14 days,
Wow.
right? So it's just like dragging their feet. And when you have something in front of you that's like, when we talked to you, you said you were going to call and you're not calling, I want to talk to your supervisor. By the way, I have the supervisor's number right here, and I have your procedures in front of me, like you're empowered to go make those demands. So they can't just kind of like drag their feet and not care.
Got you. So before we get any more into that, just got to ask you really quickly: do you celebrate America's independence on the 4th?
No, I don't celebrate the American independence.
Why not?
Um, well, one, because I'm Miwok, and I don't know that the United States has been very, I don't celebrate the United States at all. And so colonizer holidays are kind of not in my wheelhouse. I think the American education system has been, or I should say the United States, because I can't speak for the Americas, but the United States education system has been a failure that has taught a lot of people in the United States this narrative, of exceptionalism. And there's a real lack of accountability around what's happened with Native people here. Um, so I don't really celebrate. I think that there needs to be a big, maybe national conversation about the doctrine of discovery and how the legal underpinnings of the United States' law, it's hurtful to our communities. People that created the United States believe that the nation was founded like by God on a principle of freedom for all, but I don't know, it just isn't very free.
I think there was a part in the Declaration of Independence where that kind of leaves out indigenous peoples because they're considered merciless Indian savages. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, that came out of the papal bulls out of Rome.
Hmm.
And so that language is basically all throughout all kinds of American legal practices around land ownership, and it's used to dispossess Native people. So it basically was like, if you were not Christian, you are savage. And the way that that played out, at least with my people, is so my ancestral territory is like around Sacramento, California. And our community, like there was this concept called La gente de razón, like the people of reason. And so every step that you were forced into assimilation, you were closer to being a person of reason versus a savage.
Hmm.
And most of that came from the church and the mission systems.
All right.
It's hard to celebrate that,
Yeah, it's hard to get behind that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting about the workbook that you've put together. What drove you to create the workbook, and what is the workbook? Like, what does it entail?
The workbook is a easily printable. It's an organizer that can be put into a binder. If your relative goes missing, it just helps you collect information in one place, so that when all these different authorities are asking you questions about your relative, you don't have to keep telling it. There's like a secondary trauma that occurs with that. So that's what the workbook is. It's got things like for folks on this side of the US border. It's got the Bureau of Indian Affairs police protocols for missing persons. There's, how to look in the hospitals, how to search Craigslist for vehicles, how to make a poster or a flyer, missing persons flyer, but it's always and will remain always free for families, and it's just a resource made after I worked on the Olivia Lone Bear disappearance for a number of months, and watched what happened, and some of these materials I put together for her family, and so it's just been replicated so that other families can use it.
What are the current rates right now in the States, or estimations for the murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls and Two-Spirit?
It's hard to tell because we've got an issue with data and measurement, and people being mislabeled, as maybe Hispanic or maybe undocumented or Latinx. Native people go missing into the system on a lot of different fronts. So the thing that always kind of shocks me is like how many people I know in my family or families that are near mine where someone's gone missing. Or there's like stories since the gold rush for my tribe and community about people gone missing, and some of our rancherias being, open slave trades for labor, and, the settlement of the West. So I know that there's a statistic out there that's like 5,612 reports were filed to get people into the, were filed, but less than 150 of those actually made it into the National Missing Persons Database.
Wow.
So there's this huge discrepancy where there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of women, girls, and Two-Spirits gone completely missing. But the US system doesn't, one, know how to track the Native community because they're ignorant. But two, a lot of folks are hung up on the data, right? People are saying like, my family members are missing. People are turning up murdered. The oil and gas industry like is ravaging our community, and like our sisters are being brutalized or raped and then left, and found days later. And the US government says, let's quantify that so we can get you services. But we all know that it's something that's happening, like it is happening. And so the focus on data is important, but it's also like, can you just believe that families have been in outcry for a long time for missing people?
So according to your experience in your own personal data, you believe that the numbers are underrepresented, that the numbers are a lot bigger than they are right now?
Yeah, vastly.
Would you consider it to be an epidemic?
Totally. I think it's the part of the continued genocide against Native people. And it is an epidemic that's been a lot longer running than I think most people would realize, but also the scale of it is just enormous, right?
Yeah, because we have a thing up north with the oil expansion. There's been concerns of women being trafficked, harassment, murders coming out of man camps to our indigenous peoples, to like obviously small towns, but they know that they can target indigenous women and get away with it. Do we have those concerns also down in the States?
Yeah, totally. Just, I think it's the same, because it's the same system of colonialism. I live one county over from the most fracked county in the United States. So we have all kinds of issues with trafficking, abductions, kidnapping, the man camps. Like during this COVID crisis, the industry hasn't stopped at all. And so that means because water protectors and land defenders are inside protecting ourselves, like the land is vulnerable, women are vulnerable, we need to be staying indoors. Colorado, we're experiencing a lot of the same things as a lot of the other states, where we're on the cusp of a housing crisis, but we have a large Indigenous population here. So I know a lot of people, myself included, are concerned about vulnerable Indigenous women who are suddenly houseless, who then are going to be preyed upon by the oil and gas industry. Like,
wow.
Even right now, and I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but in Colorado, our governor, I don't even want to call him ours, he's not mine, but the governor of Colorado has women housed in a cattle auction coliseum that is an environmental Superfund cleanup site.
So
Like that's
indigenous
where the
women,
government.
right? Indigenous women, you're saying, are being housed in a cattle cleanup
So
building?
it's the Western Stock Emporium where they do the cattle auctions. The Coliseum is an environmental Superfund cleanup site, and that's where they have women, houseless women. And when you have a population, a large indigenous population, you have indigenous women in the Coliseum, in
Wow.
the cattle auction.
So it's women, but
That's,
it's women, but a lot of that, a big chunk of that is indigenous women. That's crazy. I've
yeah.
never heard of that. But the states hasn't really. It shocks me for like a second, and then I remember they're putting immigrants into like cages right now.
Yeah, that's in the same county as this Coliseum business.
Jesus Christ, that's crazy. This is crazy.
Hmm.
Um, I'm really at a loss for this. Is it so we have man camps, we have the homeless crisis, which is going to push more people out. Um, you just see this as like it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, especially as federal protections, IHS, the Indian Health Service, is drastically underfunded. It's just mass systemic failure. So that's why it's important that we know how to work with the land, tend to the land, and have a good relationship with the land. As these systems fail, our nations are the ones that are going to outlive this regime, just like we have the regimes that came before it. So that's why it's important to be building those systems for ourselves.
And I'm still like struggling with this right now. The talked about the systemic failure clear across the country. Canada has that as well. Um, and they launched the Murdered and Missing Inquiry reports a couple of years back. It took a few years to compile information. Does the United States have anything that they along the same lines as the MMIW report?
Heck no. We've got a presidential declaration that says, we stand with the missing and murdered Native women, and then it's just empty. There have been some grants that have been given to community organizations from the federal government to be doing work, but there is no federal initiative. Like I look at the organizers up north who probably spent a very long time organizing to try and get that inquiry going. And I'm like, that was so smart to start at that time because here people don't have any idea what's going on. And Americans, from the people from the United States can be really, some folks still think that Native people are extinct, right? Our textbooks are jacked up. The whole thing is it's a failure.
Wow. Um, so there's really right now there's no push, no incentive um, anywhere in the states to record this data.
So there are native run initiatives that are doing really good, that are
Mhm.
powerful, like the Sovereign Bodies Institute's MMIW database. But, they've got their own issues trying to interface with the US government too because of the same level of police apathy and systemic apathy that I was talking about at the very beginning. It's hard to get that information out of the freedom of information systems that we have. They don't want to work with people. So there's the Black and Missing database, there's the Sovereign Bodies MMIW database. There's a number of different databases. There's the Colibri Center for Human Rights has a database for undocumented relatives that are found near the border having lost their life. So there is no national central database. It's the missing national persons database that people are having a hard time getting into because of the way that the police work.
Wow.
There's jurisdictional overlap where they play hot potato with the case of like somebody's mom. And they're like, like it's their job.
Yeah. What's some of the more like you've talked about the? I'm still like the cattle thing's really messing with me. What's some other startling data you've come across?
Startling data I've come across.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really work in the realm of data. There's folks like the Sovereign Bodies Institute, those are the data folks. The thing that we're really working on is empowering families and getting them information of, how to self organize as a family to go find their relative. I get tired of going to funerals on a very personal level. Like, I'm tired of people being found or somebody being beat up, and just it's rugged. And the statistic is like, talk to anybody in your community about who's missing or whose auntie's gone or what happened. Everybody has stories. Okay, everybody has stories.
Is there any level of government that has been helpful in researching to make laws or policing, or is like because it really just sounds like it's a lot. It's up to the family.
I think that there are specific examples of where local police might have been helpful, but ultimately the system is built to eradicate Native people. So, there everything is just so rife with issues, and when a big system like this is left unattended, these are the things that happen. People get marginalized and lost.
Um, what's what are some of your thoughts on the best way that we can move forward? I mean, it's weird because it sounds before we get to that, it sounds like it's really more up to the families than it is up to the police. Is that the truth?
Yeah, it's the truth. Families are the ones that are invested to go put energy in to care at all. Police, they have funding for things that we don't need them for, like killing Black people. But when we need them, they don't show up, or they're like, oh, we're at capacity, but their priorities are wrong. So the police, like, ultimately aren't the ones that have to really drive a search for missing persons.
When it comes time to like get a new armored car, they have money for that. When it comes time to like
Right.
I think they're called urban tanks. They have money for that. But when it
Mhm.
comes to like establishing a database of trying to find what causes these issues, the money's just not there.
Right. So, for example, the Democratic and Republican national conventions, the local police will get $50 million just for managing that convention to put up, the protest zones or whatever they do. And then inevitably pepper spray like the community. But then when we need, funds for things like, I don't know, searches, take boats out on water, drag rivers, things like that, they're like, we're at capacity.
Wow.
So,
This doesn't really sound like this doesn't really sound like a lot of hope. I mean, and it's hard too, especially like in America's climate right now, as COVID is like spiraling completely out of control. Um, it's hard because it just feels like our value isn't really was never really on the map in the first place, but just feels like
mhm.
whatever it was just been pushed down further. How,
Well, the one thing that's, hopeful is that we have each other,
mhm.
and we continue to get stronger as a movement to bring visibility to the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirits. Right. So 5 years ago, when we were doing protests down in like Phoenix and vigils for MMIW, way before all of this stuff, we would have, 3, 5 people, maybe 15 maximum show up. But now, when you do an MMIW vigil or an action to honor someone who's been lost or pray with their family, and you invite the United States public, people will actually come out and participate in the vigil. So, knowing that there is visibility that is increasing day by day is something that gives me a lot of hope. It also creates a pathway for things like bystander intervention before anybody goes missing or murdered.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I think those are the things to focus on.
That's a lot. Um, what can the average person that's watching this right now, what can they do to help?
Well, educating oneself on the topic is important. The NIWRC, which is the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, I think it's like niwrc.org. They have a newsletter where they've been covering the issue for, so I think since like 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So really getting an understanding about what's going on and the systems that create these, overlapping tragedies happening to the community. When you start to have those conversations with people around you to increase visibility,
Mm-hmm.
being educated on the topic to be able to speak, authoritatively is a really powerful position to be in. So just being able to tell people like, oh, when you see families being incarcerated, you should know like those are when a mother is deported, she's a missing and murdered Indigenous woman,
Mm-hmm.
gone missing into the system, red fond fat
Hold on.
into the system.
Let's wait.
Like knowing how to talk about these things are important.
It froze for a couple seconds while you were speaking. We had a delay. Can you repeat that?
Oh, uh-huh.
Just the last like 15
Well,
seconds.
sure, yeah. I mean, just being able, I guess my point is to talk about the ways in which we see Indigenous women going missing, like very acutely. And then talking to people around you, like getting that visibility is really important when you have a community of people who are invisible or
Mm-hmm.
invisibilized. So just being educated on the topic and then talking to people around you. And then I'm always a fan of reading up about bystander intervention, like I just mentioned,
Yeah.
so that if you see someone who is vulnerable, that you are prepared and like educated on how to approach the situation to be helpful to that person.
Yeah, 'cause this has been at least this issue has been pretty like really under my radar. Oh shoot.
Mm.
I think is
I
it
can hear
still?
you.
Yeah, I think there might be a little problem.
Uh-oh.
I don't see it on Facebook.
I do.
Do you? We're still live?
Hmm.
Let me check it real quick. Okay, yeah.
Uh-oh.
I think we're good. I don't see it on Facebook.
Okay. I do.
Okay, so we're good then. All right, let's just keep going. Um, yeah, this has been like under my radar. I didn't really think I just being in Canada or so-called Canada, I never knew that the issue was that bad in the States until Misty Upham, the actor, um,
Hmm.
the actor actress. She was murdered, and it was blunt force trauma to her head and torso, and that's when they found her. Um, and that was kind of it. I don't know if the case went any further than this woman dying by being beaten and left. And I think there was even a bit where they said that she committed suicide. This woman who was like becoming being known for her acting um, talent and essentially like a rising indigenous star, and then gone. And that's all I heard. And I never realized it was that bad. But then stories started trickling in from my friends in the States about this, like similar stories that they had.
Yep. It's been going on a very long time too. It's not new, and it's just in like you said, it's been under people's radar. Um, there's stories, at least from my tribe, I know, where people were reporting their daughters and sisters. Like there's a passage where it's like you can get a Miwok girl for labor or lust, and we fetched the largest amount on the labor and bodily trade of humans by the gold rushers. So it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on.
So it's always such a heavy topic because we have people. in our communities that have gone murdered and been murdered and have gone missing and haven't gone home yet. Um, have been retrieved. Cases that are still closed that um, through our data with the MMIW report, which is still very much like it's a final report, but there's still stuff they've left out um, under the guise, I think, of the Liberal government, not to pursue any more about how systemic problems the police have had, like what their level of involvement really is. Because I've heard from some people that the reason why it's this bad is because of the police, and not just necessarily not following up on leads, but allowing and perpetrating this to happen.
Hmm.
And it's
Yeah.
part. Sorry. Well, what's
No,
your
it's just
what's your knowledge on that for the states?
um I've hear all kinds of very sad stories, and some of them do involve the police being part of the disappearance, or like escorting the person back home that murdered someone or assaulted someone. The police here are a nightmare. I'm sure that people have seen the protests happening because the police, um, as we know from Standing Rock, the police and the extractive industry, they work very, very close together. So when you have an industry that consumes the bodies of women and girls and two spirits and the land, and then you have the police protecting them, the police are either complicit in the missing person or um, they might be part of it. That's also why Misty doesn't take any federal funding or is not attached to any federal dollars, is because of that. Like, we need to be able to hold the system accountable for when they don't act or when they're part of oppression, right? So we retain that power to call on the police and say, this is wrong or you need to act. And then our funding isn't threatened. Like, we fund the thing with earring sales. So,
As grassroots as it needs to be effective. And that
mm-hmm.
there was again Malcolm X and I know Farrakhan says it now, but I mean when it's I guess in our for our the way we can conceptualize it, if it's brown money coming in or red money coming in, we control the money coming in. No one else can tell us what to do with it. There's no threat when it's our people funding ourselves. There's no threat from anybody like slapping our hands, taking the money, forcibly giving us a guideline to follow. So it's
Right.
cool. What can the average person, like you're talking about fundraising for Misty, what can our people do to help?
So there are a ton of advocates and activists, people who work in housing or maybe they work at the shelter, asking around and finding out who those activists are that are supporting the community. Maybe they have helped your relative get out of a bad situation with a guy. Like, finding those folks and then supporting them is really important because, as you've mentioned, it's a really heavy topic. And a lot of times, activist burnout or advocate burnout is very real. But nobody's going to be like, I'm sorry, I can't respond when someone comes to you and asks for help. So just checking in on them, making sure, that they know that they're supported and that they're doing good and strong work, like, can't be understated. Right? We're not going to be able to buy our way out of this crisis. And the thing that keeps us safe is, being in community with one another. And that's the same people who will go looking for you if you're missing. So checking in with the folks in your immediate community that support women and girls and two spirits, that advocate network can always really use support because somebody's always in a bad spot and needs gas money or something to get away.
Hmm. This is always like a difficult conversation to have. Um,
Mhm.
I guess because some of the things that immediately pop up, and maybe I can get you like how you deal with it. Because some I just shake my head and I do my best not to engage. And I don't think colonizers and settlers realize the trauma that it's associated. with some of the words they say, like, well, if she didn't want to go missing, she shouldn't have been there in the first place. Like we get a
Right.
lot of that in a lot of victim blaming in Canada. How do you deal with that on your end? How do you deal with the victim blaming?
Head on, call it for what it is. When there's this concept, at least in my just, I guess, social circles, about how there's no perfect victim, that people will always find something where they had to be like this, just can't be a human with any sort of human flaws, or else, somehow they deserved it. And I know I personally, when I encounter it, I just call it and I'm like, participating in victim blaming is not a good look. Nobody deserves to die. And I just nip it in the bud right there, with just a very open and frank statement. Um, because they will find every single way to make it where you deserve something to happen to you.
Do you think that ties back to like the original conditioning of colonizers to the people they colonize, which is like they're still savages on some level. They're still
Mm-hmm.
inhumane on some level. They still deserve this kind of treatment on some level.
Yeah, I think that's the Christian hetero patriarchal white viewpoint, that if you do not comply as a woman, as a native, as a non Christian, you will be bullied, raped, and beaten into submission. Right? So, this is part of submission, is harming women. When someone feels powerless, like, so there are some laws in place now where tribes are able to prosecute non-natives that come onto the reservation lands and then like rape somebody. Previously, they knew they could come onto res land, rape a lady, and then leave, and then the tribal officers had to stop at the border. And then the white officers would never like extricate the guy back to go face charges for raping the person on the reservation lands. So when we have these times, at least I guess just personally, where settlers are feeling very disempowered, I would wager that the violence directly felt by Indigenous women and people in general, is going to increase as that kind of loss of settler dominion, um, is felt. Because the reality is that the settler state is crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
There is a loss of dominion. They should be like concerned about the strength of our people and our resolve to survive. So a lot of that, I feel like the brunt of it is bore by the bodies of Indigenous women. So,
And we talked a little bit about this with Russ Dibo, but women are the original teachers of everybody, like of children, of us. Mothers are the first teacher. Mothers, when they're in a traditional, in like a very healthy house home, it's the mother that's the first person that's teaching you love, teaching you forgiveness, teaching you about life, teaching you just life lessons. Um,
mm-hmm.
and I really feel like, and this has been a lot of it was always women thinkers who uh, seeded this into my mind, is that when you destroy the women, you destroy the society. But they don't necessarily have to do that as colonizers, but they just have to allow it to happen. So a man camp comes in and they allow these crimes to be perpetuated. They don't have to follow up with anything. They just sit on the sidelines essentially and stare at their feet when we come at them and saying like, yeah, another person's gone missing.
Yeah, I have a little less patience, I guess, in that arena. Particularly, I guess, because I'm white passing, but I've seen the way that white women, settler women, have cooked meals for these guys who go out and brutalize people, who rub their feet, rub their backs, all this stuff. It grosses me out. And I just, it's that violence of white liberals.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that goes with that statement. Liberals and conservatives, I think the only real two difference, and this again, it's through Malcolm X, it's through James Baldwin, um, liberals being foxes and conservatives being wolves, and we're essentially either their meal or standing in between them and their meal. They have different approaches, but ultimately it's the same thing. And I believe it was James
Hmm.
Baldwin who said that like the liberals or conservatives, the right or left, have no real initiative for us to have self determination. They want to control us, essentially. They want to be able to control our thoughts, our self determination, and where we are going. They just use different methods of doing it. Whereas,
Hmm.
like, liberals will use honey and empty promises. Conservative will try to railroad his policies and legislation right through you. And we see that
Hmm.
we see that in Standing Rock. I go back to this because this blows my mind. In Canada, we have the RCMP, and they go from one coast to the other. There's not a lot of places that they can't go. Even on reservations, when a certain law is broken or they're called, you call 911, they're going to go to the reservation. But the fact that if somebody rapes an Indigenous woman, and this is only like you're saying, is this all reservations or just some reservations have had this law amended? Or if a woman gets raped and the person who's raped her leaves the res and is essentially off the jurisdiction, they're basically home free.
Yeah, that jurisdictional overlap creates these like big chasms where cases just get passed around in between jurisdictions because a bunch of jurisdictions, it's like their responsibility. And since it's all these different jurisdictions' responsibility, none of them take responsibility.
They just keep passing the buck. That's
Yeah.
so it's wild to me that these people get away with it. Once they hit that
Well,
that boundary line, that it's it's insane. That's just insane. That it's a form of colonial violence. What other ways do you notice that Indigenous women feel colonial violence in America?
um, I mean, that's a complicated question because it's constantly
Hmm.
like, for example, we don't have access to the Rocky Mountain National Park that's up here right now. But if people, white people with reservations, can go and they've paid the money, they can go into the, national park. Um, I don't know if that's centered exactly on women, but during this time when it's time to gather for different medicines, that's extremely violent being walked off of land like that. Um, I've had my own run ins trying to gather just on public lands around here. The colonial violence also comes by way of like, so Native women, Native people were part of a diaspora just like everybody else. So all of the American or the United States systems touch our lives. I know personally, like the Indian Health Service has been cut way, way, way back. And that's violent. I need my health care.
Hmm.
I was out at Standing Rock. I wound up with a reactive airway disease. So that makes me vulnerable or more so to COVID. And then suddenly, like, your clinic's not open because it's just on every single level, Native people slip through the cracks unless there's organizations like the Denver Indian Center or Spirit of the Sun that are out of the Denver Indian Center that are watching specifically because they know you're in the community. Like, it's just really easy to get swept up where everything is against you. Um, I mentioned earlier, like, I'm white passing, so I can only imagine, but so far, what it feels like for someone who has a different, darker phenotype of their skin than I am.
Hmm.
Right. So I know that it's also incredibly violent in that way.
So
Just the system works as it should, which is to eradicate Native people.
when you look at from being white passing, it must have given you a pretty good perspective um, of what relationships looks like between Indigenous women and white women. What does that look like in the States?
Sometimes I personally wonder who's a bigger existential threat to our existence, whether it be white women who will smile in your face but like stab you in the back, or white men who will just openly attack, right? Because with white women, you want to trust them, be friends, until something happens. And then there's a moment where they have to break white solidarity, which is this thing where white people won't make other white people uncomfortable in a racial way. They like will remain quiet.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually when white women will abandon you, is when you ask them to break white solidarity. It's also like white women who love to just make dream catchers out of like their dreads and weird stuff like that. So I wouldn't say it's a great relationship with white women, but again, it's all just like kind of settler strife, regular old settler strife.
Hmm. I always feel, especially now, with the BLM movements taking place, it really solidified it for me. Standing Rock was one of those things that kind of put it into my radar, but with the current Black Lives Matter protests and rallies, peaceful gatherings, I feel like if you're white and white nationalists don't consider you to be a race traitor, then you really aren't helping. You like if you're white and the KKK don't hate you or don't see you as the enemy, then
Mhm.
essentially they see you as an ally. And
Yeah.
I really feel like we need more white race traders that aren't
Hmm.
afraid to break that white solidarity, that aren't afraid to get into these uncomfortable places or positions with other white people.
Yeah. There were a number of really good race traders who did some powerful actions at Standing Rock to stop construction, um, in solidarity with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe.
Mhm.
Uh, the thing that I find really moving in this moment is just like recalling back to Standing Rock and Black Lives Matter they were there with us, like at actions constantly for months. So this is a moment where, you know, that kind of solidarity, like Black and Indigenous solidarity, is everything. We are all under the same colonial capitalist system that keeps us divided. So I completely agree with you that we need more white people to cede power, to acknowledge the power that light or white skin gives you, and then just like seriously just cede power, because there are moments, and this is something I experience like with white passing privilege, is that there's always a moment where you can pass the mic, where you can be like, hey, why don't we bring in, oh, you're doing a mural project, why don't you bring in a Black native two-spirit person to paint it so that you have intersectional like viewpoints included. Just pass the mic. Stop being so like taking up all the space in the room.
Yeah, and I find that like a lot of what they say. Again, I had this conversation with Russ just now. There's so much that they don't know about us. They've been conditioned to
Mm-hmm.
believe a lot of lies, myths about who we are. That really, when they get into situations and places like this, it's really their time to listen and learn. And it's really hard for people who feel like they have, they have so much of value to add. And that might be true, but at the same time, like I know for a fact I can look at most white people and be like, they don't really know anything about us in general.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know about our movement, they don't know what we're doing, they don't know what we're trying to accomplish. Um, and it's a perfect time, like you said, just to pass the mic and just listen, just learn. Um,
Yeah, even as like a white passing person, I've had to just sit myself down, and I've been told just sit down and listen. And I think humbling yourself is something that we need more white people to do, where they're just like sit and listen, because at the end of the day, if someone tells you that you're being messed up, it's loving. The people who don't say anything and they just let you continue to mess up, they don't love you enough to even speak it.
hmm,
So learning that when someone's calling you out or calling you in, that that's actually an act of love, and seeing through that defensiveness. Like, I also believe at the end of the day, though, we don't need white allies to get free.
no,
So
We don't. Yeah, we don't. It's just like it would help, but it's not really essential. Especially since like yeah, I mean not to demonize all white people, but there's a growth period that when it becomes uncomfortable, there's a lot that choose to not address that discomfort, that choose not to become that race trader what we need, or that the co-conspirator. They just stay in this really comfortable place, and if you can overcome that, the where we could go, not only just as like indigenous folks, but where we can go as like the human race, is almost really limitless. There's so much limitless potential out there.
Hmm.
I don't want to keep you too
Yeah.
much. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to ask you, like, if you were to envision right now, if you were to envision, obviously it doesn't have to be like incredibly intricate, but if you were to envision a pathway, um, to like steps towards solving the MMIW crisis in the States, what are some key markers that you would need to see?
So honoring the treaties in the United States fundamentally undermines everything the United States is about. But if folks want to stop the hemorrhaging of lives, we need to divest from the US system, right? That are kept in place to keep the United States like wealthy. So I'm of the mind of two things. One, the ship is going down. Colonialist capitalism, we're not post capitalism. We're in a state of transformation right now. Um, so the only two things that I see that we're able to do is offer hospice to people as the systems fail, or two, completely divest ourselves, which I think this would be good to talk with your next guest, Kanahus, about, but completely divest ourselves from the US, from the capitalist colonialist systems of extraction. So if we want to stop the MMIW crisis, we're going to have to envision new societies, but that are rooted in honoring the old ways,
Mhm.
right? Indigenous people all over the place know how to survive millennia on this continent. So if the human race is going to survive, non-native people who are watching this like need to get in lockstep with native people if you want your folks to survive. So I don't know, it's people want to get involved, it's going to be one of those two things, either completely divest or offer hospice
Wow.
as systems fail.
So the last question I have, or actually, there's two because I just got someone just messaged me.
Sure.
How would society look if Indigenous, or is it Miwok? Miwok?
Mm-hmm.
How do you say your
Miwok.
Miwok? Women were allowed to be fully who they are without fear and living from strong Miwok values. What would society look like?
What would society look like?
At
Um,
least in your area.
I really, yeah, I was about to say, I really only know in my area. We're matriarchal, and so it would look a lot less patriarchal in the ways that we are seeing it right now. So that means more communal ownership, communal child rearing, um, probably going back to things um, like more prevalent song
Mhm.
and honoring the spirit of the plants and animals that we eat. I think we would see a return back to traditional values that have been upheld by our culture bearers in the community. Um, and it would be beautiful. I would love to see that.
That's
I hope
awesome.
that, the younger generations are able to see that.
So very last question. What message do you have for the people within the States and those north of the medicine line? For our people?
What message do you have?
Because this is
There's
really
a lot
dark.
more of us than there are them. Yeah, but there's a lot more of us than there are them. And we've got just thousands of ancestors that have our back. So I always encourage people to just pray and to be thankful and to give thanks to the Creator for keeping us alive this long, because we're the result of the love of thousands.
Well, thank you. We'll have you back again. Again, so if people wanted to help out
Thanks, kids.
Misty, which is the murdered and missing, can you finish that?
The Missing Indigenous Sisters Tools
Missing
Initiative, and you
Indigenous.
can just find us on Facebook. Yeah.
So if they wanted to buy some really cool earrings and help out a beautiful cause, check them out on Facebook. The money's going to go directly to the grassroots organizers, the people that are putting the moccasins to the ground. And so please just give them some support, share their network within your network, and realize that the struggle of murdered and missing Indigenous women, Two-Spirit girls, is one that we face in North, Center, and South America. So with that, I just want to say thank you. Cancel Canada Day, cancel July 4th, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good. Have a good day. Bye.